The weight of his question hung heavy in the air, binding me in a silence I couldn't escape. I couldn't answer, couldn't look away. It felt as though Cassius had wrapped an invisible leash around me, and with every passing second, the knot tightened. Chapter 6. Cassius stared at me sharply, his voice cold as he asked,
"Are you truly willing to do anything I command?"
His tone felt like a challenge, testing how far I could endure the pressure. I was incredibly nervous under his intense gaze, my body frozen. With a slightly ragged breath, I nodded slowly, my voice barely audible.
"Yes, Your Grace."
Cassius studied me for a moment, as though evaluating my reaction.
"Good. You're quite interesting, Lana,"
he said, his tone a bit softer, though still carrying an authoritative edge.
"Now, you may leave."
I was confused by his words. What did he mean by interesting? But without much thought, I began walking toward the door. However, just as I was about to step out, Cassius' voice stopped me.
"Lana."
I turned, and Cassius calmly picked up a red apple from the table. Without a word, he tossed it toward me.
"Catch it, and eat it."
I was taken aback and nearly dropped the apple, but with all my effort, I managed to catch it, almost stumbling in the process. I stared at the apple, still trying to process what had just happened. Without thinking, I muttered a thank you, although I didn't understand the reasoning behind his actions.
"Thank you, Duke Valtier,"
I said in a voice that barely reached him. Cassius didn't respond, only watching me with a gaze I couldn't decipher. I felt a little uneasy but couldn't find the words to say more. I quickly turned and left the room, my mind racing with everything that had just occurred. That night, after eating and preparing for bed, I sat at the edge of the bed. My eyes were drawn to the red apple, still sitting untouched on the nightstand. I stared at it for a moment, and without meaning to, a small smile crept onto my face. Maybe, just maybe, Cassius wasn't entirely bad. ******. The next day, I was once again faced with a world so different from my simple life. I was ordered to attend a family event held in a grand building at the city center, accompanied by a horse-drawn carriage from Duke Valtier. The room, with all its opulence, made me feel like a stranger stranded in a world far beyond my reach. Crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling glittered beautifully, and the scent of expensive perfume mingled with the fragrance of flowers adorning the tables in the large room. The atmosphere was so grand, and I felt as though I were in another world I had never imagined before. Each guest wore exquisite clothing made of shimmering silk and brocade, glinting under the candlelight. They spoke casually, laughed, and enjoyed the lavish dishes being served. Meanwhile, I felt out of place with my simple, albeit expensive, outfit. This dress had been chosen by the Duke for me to wear to this event. Although I tried to blend in, I knew deep down that I didn't belong in this world. I attempted to find a little peace, so I decided to step out to the open balcony while looking for the Duke. The cold night air greeted me, pushing away the unease that had begun to settle in my heart. Why had Duke Valtier asked me to accompany him to such a high-class event? Was he going to sell me off to another noble? A servant exchange? Or worse, was I to be given to another noble as a means of satisfying desires? The sound of footsteps and conversation from the guests behind me faded, making me feel a little more at ease. I stood by the balcony, overlooking the garden filled with beautiful flowers, but my thoughts and heart remained restless. Amidst the calm, my eyes caught the figure of Cassius standing at the far corner of the balcony. He appeared alone, distant from the crowd. His expression was serious, as if lost in thought or trying to resolve something in his mind. I was surprised to see him there, alone, away from the attention of others. My desire to respect someone's personal space held me back from approaching, but my curiosity was stronger. Suddenly, I saw him raise his hand to his lips. His movement was quick, almost invisible, and before I knew it, he bit into his own wrist. I froze, my eyes wide with disbelief as I watched the act. Blood began to slowly drip from the open wound, and it felt as though the world around me came to a standstill. Fear and confusion swept over me quickly, like a dark shadow clouding my thoughts. I was paralyzed, stuck in place, confused and terrified. What was Cassius doing? Why was he hurting himself like that? I didn't know what to do. As the blood continued to trickle, I felt powerless, torn between a strong desire to understand and a creeping fear gnawing at my heart. For a moment, it felt like the world around me had vanished. All the sounds, all the movements, seemed to disappear, leaving only one question that echoed in my mind. I tried to make sense of it, but everything only became more confusing. But when I finally found my voice, my heart whispered quietly.
Who is the Duke, really? What is he? Is he a monster, as the rumors say? Or am I just hallucinating?
There was no answer, only a deepening confusion. I didn't know if I truly wanted to know the answer. Chapter 7. I stood frozen there, confused and anxious. What had I just seen? My body felt stiff, as if a heavy weight was pressing down on my chest. The blood dripping from Cassius' wrist. It wasn't something I could process so easily. Why had he hurt himself? What was he actually doing? Suddenly, Cassius released his bite from his hand, and the bite wound immediately healed. It was as if it had never existed. He turned with such calmness, his sharp eyes locking with mine. A small but sharp smile formed on his lips. A smile that made me feel as if I were caught in a game I didn't understand. His steps were slow, each one feeling like an unspoken threat. I could only stare at him, my body frozen, as if the strength to move had vanished. He stopped right in front of me, his smile widening, making my heart beat faster. In a low voice, almost like a whisper, Cassius asked,
Do you like spying, Lana?
I felt my cheeks flush, and embarrassment spread through my body. I wanted to say something, to defend myself, but the words were stuck in my throat. It felt like the world around me was shrinking, trapped by the tension between us. But on the other hand, there was a curiosity that kept disturbing my thoughts. Why was he doing this? What did all of this mean?
Forgive me, Your Grace. I was just...
My voice sounded weak, as if I couldn't form the right words. Cassius tilted his head slightly, his chin still held under the control of his cold but firm fingers. His gaze was sharp, as if trying to pierce the deepest corners of my mind.
Open your mouth.
He commanded, his tone low but firm. I swallowed, my body filled with doubt, but somehow, I obeyed. Slowly, my mouth parted, and at that moment, I felt his thumb, covered in his own blood, enter my mouth. I flinched, the sharp, warm metallic taste spreading across my tongue. My body seemed paralyzed, heavy and helpless. My heart raced, but all my muscles refused to follow my commands. Cassius' thumb moved deliberately, slow yet purposeful, exploring every inch of my mouth. My breath quickened uncontrollably. His silver eyes grew darker as he watched me closely, almost enjoying the way my chest rose and fell erratically. A small smile curled at the corners of his lips when he saw me swallow, and without realizing it, my eyes closed for a brief moment, lost in the intoxicating atmosphere.
As I thought.
He murmured quietly, his voice like a whisper amidst the darkness.
You shine even brighter under the full moon, Lana. You are the moon itself, appearing in the midst of the dark night.
His words pierced deep, making me feel something I couldn't quite explain. But before I could fully comprehend it, Cassius slowly withdrew his hand, leaving a faint trace of his blood on my lips. He looked at me once again, this time with a colder expression, almost devoid of emotion.
If you want to know who I really am,
he said, his tone now flat.
Follow me.
Without waiting for a response, he turned away, his silhouette merging with the shadows of the night. I stood still, trying to steady my breath that still raced, before finally, my steps followed him into the darkness.
Why are you still standing there? Hurry.
I was startled and briefly thought he was joking. But his gaze, so serious and commanding, made me realize this was not an invitation. This was an order. If I refused, I knew he would still make me follow him. There was a power behind his words that I couldn't fight, and I could feel it. He didn't need to threaten or speak harshly to make me feel trapped. Just by his presence, just by the way he spoke, I knew I had no other choice. With a mixture of conflicting emotions growing more confusing, I nodded slowly.
I will follow you, Your Grace.
I answered, my voice almost inaudible. Without waiting for any further response, Cassius began walking again, and for some reason, it felt as though my body moved without my control, following his steps. I didn't know what would happen next. All I knew was that I was trapped in something much bigger than myself. With every step Cassius took, with every command that escaped his blood-red lips, I felt as though I was losing control of myself. I followed him, unable to resist the pull, as though some invisible force was drawing me deeper into a world I couldn't comprehend. Cassius led me into a lavish master bedroom, far more opulent than I ever imagined. The high ceilings were adorned with beautiful paintings, and crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Everything felt so foreign to me, this world so far removed from the simple life I had known. It all seemed so perfect, so elegant, a world that belonged to Duke Cassius. The beauty of both him and the room blended together, complementing one another. Without a word, Cassius stopped in front of the massive bed at the center of the room. The silence hung heavy for a moment before his firm voice broke it.
Sit.
He commanded, and his tone left no room for refusal. I was stunned, caught in the intensity of his gaze. There was something about the way he spoke, the way he looked at me, that made me feel as though I had no choice. I nodded, despite my hesitation, and sat on the edge of the large bed. My body felt stiff, confused by what was happening. But at the same time, a deeper feeling began to grow inside me. Every word, every command that left Cassius' lips made me feel more entranced, as though there was something inside me compelling me to obey him. I couldn't explain this feeling. I didn't know this man, I didn't understand who he really was, but somehow I felt as if I belonged to him, and that feeling was undeniable. As if I would do anything for him. It was such an absurd sensation, considering I knew who he was in the eyes of society. Cassius, Duke of Valtier, was a name widely known, though often spoken of with less than kind tones. His father, Duke Louis Valtier, had passed away without leaving a legitimate heir. Even the story of Duke Valtier himself was filled with oddities. No one truly knew who had taken care of his affairs, who had maintained his vast wealth and legacy. Until Cassius appeared. Cassius Valtier, who had never been seen in the social world before, suddenly emerged as the son of Duke Valtier, inheriting all the luxury and power that came with the title. People quickly came to know him as the
Hidden
son, appearing out of nowhere after his father had fallen ill and passed away. Nevertheless, he took charge of his domain with exceptional skill, aided by his trusted confidant, Lord Rail. All of these changes were difficult to accept. Many whispered in hushed tones, unable to let go of the mysteries surrounding his family. One of the rumors was about Duke Valtier, the elder, who had never married. He had remained a bachelor until his death. Then why, they asked, did this man suddenly appear, claiming to be the Duke's son, just as the aristocrat scrambled to claim his inheritance after his death? I clearly remembered the whispered gossip around us, the talk that never fully faded.
But there's no denying that Cassius looks so much like his father.
They said, half in awe, half in shivers. Valtier, the elder, was a figure hard to forget, cold, aloof, and full of mystery. He seemed to live in his own world, detached from everything and everyone, even the societal norms that bound ordinary people. He was a dark, beautiful figure who defied rules and logic. Now, Cassius stood before the world, carrying the same elegance, with an aura that made people feel insignificant. His physical appearance, the way he carried himself, it all reminded everyone of the past that many wanted to forget but could never quite escape. He was like the reincarnation of Duke Valtier, rising from the ashes of history to shake the world that had once been abandoned by his father. Chapter 8. I stared at him, confusion settling over me, an uncomfortable feeling crawling across my skin. What does he really want from me? I thought to myself. I lowered my head, the weight of my thoughts pressing down on every inch of my body. What was happening? Why did it feel like I was trapped in a world I didn't understand? Without warning, Cassius pulled a small knife from his pocket. Before I even realized what he intended, the tip of the knife sliced through my skin, cutting my hand. I gasped in shock, the pain surging deep within me as blood began to drip. I screamed and instinctively jerked my hand back, but Cassius held it firm with his strong grip.
What are you doing, Your Grace?
My voice trembled, barely escaping my throat. Cassius smiled faintly, but it wasn't a comforting smile. It felt more like a smile of pride, as though he had one.
Don't worry, Lana.
He said, his voice implying that I had no reason to fear.
I'll heal your wound quickly.
The blood flowed faster, and I could only watch him, unsure of what to do. Cassius bent down, examining the blood dripping from my hand. I felt my body stiffen, and as he suddenly lifted his gaze, his eyes locked onto mine with such intensity that I felt trapped within his stare. I couldn't fight his gaze. Then he moved closer, crouching in front of me, narrowing the gap between us. I could feel his warm breath against my skin, and I could only remain still, trembling.
Are you afraid, Lana?
His voice was low and full of challenge. I wanted to respond, to fight back, but my body wouldn't obey. Every word I wanted to speak seemed to vanish in the rising fear.
I don't understand what's happening.
I finally managed, my voice barely audible. Cassius smiled wider, his gaze as if assessing every part of me.
You don't need to understand everything now. You just need to obey.
He inhaled the scent of my blood, then slowly licked it, never once breaking eye contact with me. I was stunned, my eyes wide, my heart racing faster. Something was terribly wrong, something I didn't understand at all. I tried to speak, but my words caught in my throat.
What are you doing? This isn't entirely my desire, Lana.
Cassius said, his tone strange, as if confessing regret. But the regret sounded like a lie, for his gaze still held complete control.
But you arrived at the right time for me, though perhaps not for you. What do you mean?
I asked, more confused than ever. Everything he did seemed beyond my comprehension. He lifted his gaze and stared at me deeply, as if measuring every aspect of me.
How unfortunate for you.
He continued, his voice growing low and terrifying.
Because starting tonight, Lana, you belong to me.
I felt the world around me suddenly stop. Time seemed to disappear, and all I could hear was the pounding of my heart as Cassius licked the wound on the palm of my hand. His words were like chains, binding me, and I didn't know what to do. My body remained frozen, even as my thoughts and emotions clashed in a whirlwind of confusion.
What's happening to me?
I finally whispered, my voice trembling, overwhelmed by an intense sense of bewilderment. Slowly, the wound on my palm began to close. Cassius glanced at me briefly, and I saw a flicker of darkness in his eyes.
What's happening to you?
He asked, his voice softer now, but there was an underlying tension building.
You're in my power, Lana. There's no turning back.
I wanted to say something, to scream, but for some reason, the words wouldn't come out. Inside me, something was fighting fear, confusion, and something else that made my body feel trapped in an invisible bond.
Don't try to resist.
He continued, his voice now more commanding, without room for objection.
You've already chosen to obey my every word, Lana. Tonight, I'm just sealing that promise.
I stared at him, my eyes widening, but my body felt so heavy. What was I doing here? Why couldn't I fight back? It felt as though Cassius had bound me with something far stronger than a physical restraint, something deeper and beyond my understanding. My mind spun, as if the world around me was blurring. Cassius' words struck me like a bolt of lightning, breaking the silence.
I'm a vampire, Lana.
He said, his voice calm but filled with certainty.
And I need a partner. Someone who's willing to belong to me.
I remained silent, his words spinning in my head. A vampire. A partner. Belonging to him. It all felt like a nightmare I couldn't explain. Cassius looked at me, his expression half amused, half serious.
You're not listening to me properly, Lana.
He said slowly.
Being mine means you'll have to give something very valuable. I don't have money or any valuable possessions, Your Grace.
Cass chuckled softly and shook his head.
I don't need money like you think. What I need is your loyalty. Every full moon, like tonight, your blood will belong to me.
I stared at him, confused and terrified.
What do you mean? You want my blood?
Cassius nodded, his thin smile unchanged.
Yes. It's a small sacrifice for someone who chooses to be at their master's side. Loyal, obedient, no room for doubt.
A chill ran down my spine, my lips dry.
Why me? Why did you choose me? I haven't found the right answer yet. But you're different.
His response was so certain, almost like an unshakable statement.
You have something others don't. A little of your blood can satisfy my thirst. That's why I chose you. You must belong to me.
I wanted to scream, to run, but my body felt bound. How could I accept something like this? I wasn't part of this world. I never imagined I'd get trapped in a game of darkness like this. I flinched as I heard his words.
Be your partner? I don't even know you.
My voice cracked, torn between anger and fear.
You don't need to know me now.
Cassius answered calmly.
You just need to understand that being mine means you'll obey every command I give.
Before I could respond, a loud sound came from the direction of the door. I turned, seeing the door swing open. A woman entered with an air of arrogance, her elegant gown swishing with every step. Her face was beautiful but cold, like a perfect marble statue. Cassius slowly turned his body, a cold look spreading across his face.
Evelyn.
He said briefly.
Cassius.
She responded in the same tone, but there was fire in her eyes. Evelyn stopped right in front of Cassius. Without warning, she raised her hand and slapped his face hard. The sound of the slap echoed through the room. Chapter 9. I was stunned, my mouth hanging open, while Cassius only gave a faint smile, as usual, as though the slap meant nothing to him. Cassius remained silent for a moment, his gaze, which had been filled with control, now slightly surprised. He lifted his injured hand and touched his cheek in a strange manner, as though assessing the pain he had just received. Or perhaps he was just casually realigning his jaw, which had been dislocated. Did I see that right? How strong was this woman to make Cassius' jaw pop out of place with a single slap?
Evelyn.
Cassius sighed.
I don't have time for this drama. Drama?
Evelyn said sharply, her eyes glancing toward me with hatred.
What are you doing with this girl, Cassius? Do you think you can just disregard me like that?
I felt my blood freeze. This woman clearly knew Cassius, and the way she spoke made me realize that she was jealous.
Evelyn.
Cassius said, his voice low.
This is none of your business. None of my business.
Evelyn laughed bitterly, then stepped forward, poking Cassius' chest with her finger.
I am Countess Evelyn of House Mortain, and I am more deserving to be your partner than anyone else, especially compared to this lowly girl.
I felt humiliated and confused, but I couldn't say anything.
Evelyn.
Cassius sighed again, his voice weary.
How many times do I have to say it? I'm not interested in you.
Evelyn spun around, her eyes blazing with fury as she glared at me.
And you're interested in her?
Her tone was condescending.
This girl? She doesn't even know anything about our world, Cassius. Are you serious?
Cassius stepped forward, positioning himself as a barrier between me and Evelyn.
That's none of your concern, Evelyn. I decide who is worthy to be by my side. By your side.
Evelyn scoffed, but her frustration was clear.
You choosing her? This girl just appeared in your life. I've been waiting for you for decades, Cassius. You know that.
Cassius stared at Evelyn with an icy, almost emotionless expression.
And did I ask you to do that?
Evelyn paused for a moment, but her eyes grew even sharper.
So, what does she have, Cassius? What makes her better than me?
Cassius took a deep breath, his voice firm yet calm.
She has something you never had, Evelyn. Sincerity. The courage to be herself, without hidden agendas. And most importantly, humanity. Humanity, Cass?
Evelyn seemed even angrier now, her hands clenched so tightly that her knuckles turned white.
Neither of us is human, how ironic. Listen to me. You'll regret this, Cassius.
She said sharply, her anger bubbling through.
You think humanity is better than immortality? Let's see how long that lasts.
Cassius didn't show any reaction except a thin, almost lethal smile.
Go ahead, Evelyn. Do whatever you want. I'm not a man you can control.
Evelyn's face flushed red, swallowing the unbearable humiliation. She cast a glare full of hatred at me, making me feel cornered. Then, with a dramatic turn, she spun around. Her gown swished like a gust of wind as she stormed out, her steps heavy with frustration. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. The journey home in the carriage was quiet, though my mind was far from calm. I sat beside Cassius, staring out the window while replaying the events of earlier in my head. The slap, Evelyn's hateful stare, and Cassius' words about a partner kept swirling in my mind. Suddenly, the Duke was treating me very differently, not like a servant, but more like his partner. Something that confused me, though I wasn't exactly opposed to it. Finally, I gathered the courage to break the silence. I turned to him, studying his face, which remained calm, as if unaffected by everything.
Who is she, really, Your Grace?
I asked softly. Cassius shifted his gaze from the window, giving me a small smile that was hard to interpret.
Evelyn is just someone who doesn't know when to give up. You don't need to worry about her. Not worry.
I furrowed my brow, unsatisfied with his answer.
She slapped you, shouted at you, and called me a lowly girl. I think I have a reason to be concerned.
Cassius chuckled softly, his low voice resonating within the carriage.
Her slap was nothing more than a minor disturbance. She's trying to hold on to something that isn't hers. Your Grace. Cass?
I shook my head slightly, feeling like all of this was too complicated to understand.
Cassius, what do you really want from me?
He paused for a moment, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. It was as though there was something deep and mysterious there, something I couldn't quite penetrate.
Lana.
He started, his voice softer now.
You are someone unique. I can't just let you go.
I frowned, feeling unsatisfied with that answer.
Why me? There are so many other people out there. Even Evelyn seems more suited for you, Your Grace. Cass? Cass?
Cassius nodded as he leaned back against the seat, his gaze never leaving mine.
Evelyn and I have a long history, hundreds of years.
He finally said.
She was once my main source of sustenance.
I blinked.
Source of sustenance?
Cassius nodded nonchalantly, as if it were the most natural thing.
We shared blood for decades. It was a mutually beneficial relationship. But it wasn't love, not a real relationship. It lasted only until one of us found the right partner, and that's when it ended. Coincidentally, I don't enjoy drinking human blood, it's repulsive.
I fell silent, feeling a bigger question lingering in my mind.
And now, you think I'm the right partner?
Cassius smiled faintly, but this time there was something softer in his eyes.
Yes.
Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Days passed in confusion, but I tried to ignore everything that had happened. Cassius, or His Grace Duke Valtier, had been away for the past few days due to work matters. I became more and more skeptical. Could it be that I was just imagining things? Amidst my duties as a servant, I tried to speak with a few other servants. While dusting in the dining room, I gathered the courage to ask Elise, one of the senior servants. She had always been kind to me and wasn't part of the group that liked to prank me.
Elise?
I whispered, making sure no one else could hear.
Have you ever felt that His Grace is different? I mean, something about him seems odd.
Elise raised an eyebrow and gave a small smile.
You're still new here, Lana. Everyone knows His Grace is different with his status and power as a duke and his ties to the royal family. It's natural for him to have an aura that ordinary people like us can't reach. That's not what I mean.
I insisted, feeling a little frustrated.
Has he ever done something irrational?
Elise chuckled softly, her voice low to avoid drawing attention.
Lana, I've worked here for almost 10 years. His Grace is cold and firm, but he's human like us. Maybe you've been reading too many Gothic novels.
I gave a faint smile, though my heart remained uneasy. Maybe Elise was right. Or maybe they were just too afraid to say anything. As I continued my tasks, I overheard a conversation from other servants cleaning in the kitchen.
You know? His Grace is only 28 years old. So young for a duke.
One of the servants said, her voice filled with admiration. Chapter 10.
His age may be young, but his aura doesn't match. It's as if he's been a duke in a past life. The way he walks, speaks, he could rule the entire kingdom with just a glance.
Another servant added, sounding almost dreamy.
I just hope he's not too harsh, so he can attract more women and marry quickly.
Another commented.
Imagine, if he smiled more often, he could make anyone fall in love.
I frowned at their conversation. So, His Grace Duke Valtier was only 28 years old? That was just 6 years older than me. Yet from the conversation yesterday, I had learned that Cassius was centuries old. How old exactly, I didn't dare ask. To me, he was still a distant figure. He was the master of the house, and I was the servant. But what they said was true. Cassius carried himself like someone much older and wiser. I tried to forget the strange events of that night. Maybe it was just my imagination or the effect of exhaustion. However, when I returned to the living room after finishing my tasks, my heart nearly stopped. There, sitting casually on the sofa, was His Grace Duke Valtier, waiting for me. I froze in place, unsure of how to react. Cassius lifted his gaze from the documents in his hands and looked at me with a small smile, something I had never seen before.
Lana.
He greeted in a calm, yet authoritative voice.
Come here.
I walked closer, hesitant, lowering my head as I should in front of a noble.
Is there anything I can assist you with, Your Grace?
I asked, keeping my voice polite. He stood slowly, folding the document in his hand before tucking it into his coat pocket.
I just wanted to make sure you're all right while I'm not here.
He said. His tone remained neutral, not warm, but strangely sincere. I looked up, a little surprised by his unexpected concern.
I'm fine, Your Grace.
Cassius tilted his head, his eyes studying me closely, as though trying to detect a lie behind my words.
Really? You've seemed uneasy lately.
I froze. My tongue felt tied, unsure of how to respond. His hand lifted slightly, as if to touch me, but stopped midway when he noticed the tension in my face. His movement shifted, as though he realized his action might have been too forward.
I don't want you to feel pressured, Lana.
He said finally, his tone almost warm, though his authority still lingered.
You are my partner now, my wife, until death do us part. That's a long time for you.
His words made my chest tighten, confusing and unsettling me. But I could only nod, not wanting to complicate the already heavy atmosphere. He looked at me for a moment before adding,
If there's anything you wish to ask, just ask. We'll take it slow. All right, Your Grace.
I responded softly. Today felt so strange. Cassius, His Grace Duke Valtier, had suddenly shown concern that made me nervous out of my mind. I didn't know what was happening, whether something had changed or if it was just a fleeting moment. But his behavior lately was different. That afternoon, he asked me to prepare 2 servings of food and then instructed me to sit at the dining table after serving the dishes. Though I sat at the far end of the table, far from him, it felt impossible to eat peacefully. How could I, when he had been staring at me like that the whole time?
Finish your meal.
His voice suddenly broke the silence. Soft, yet firm. I jumped, almost dropping my fork.
Why yes, Your Grace.
I replied nervously, though my stomach suddenly felt heavy, making it hard to continue eating. My hands trembled as I tried to lift the bread from my plate. And of course, because I was so nervous, I accidentally bumped my plate. The plate fell to the floor and shattered with a loud crash that echoed through the room. I froze. Oh no. I stared at the broken pieces of the plate, my breath caught in my throat.
I'm sorry, Your Grace. I didn't mean to.
Cassius' chair shifted with a sharp sound. I immediately shut my eyes, bracing for a scolding. But the anger never came. Instead, I felt his hand gently but firmly pull my wrist.
Don't move. You might hurt your feet or hands.
He said. I opened my eyes, shocked. He was already standing in front of me, protecting me from the shards of glass. Cassius, Duke Valtier, who was usually cold and harsh, was now kneeling on the floor, checking to see if I was hurt. I stared at him, speechless. He even called for another servant to clean up the mess. Once everything was cleaned up, he stood again, looking at me with eyes that I couldn't quite interpret.
You need to learn to stay calm and not panic, so you don't make such mistakes.
He said quietly. I could only nod like a fool.
Thank you, Your Grace.
I muttered, my voice barely audible. He sighed, glancing at his pocket watch before saying,
I must leave.
Before turning, he looked at me one more time. That look, warm? Or was I imagining things?
Take care of yourself.
He said. Then he left, along with Lord Rail, his right-hand man, who waved kindly at me. I remained standing in the same spot, staring at the door now closed tightly. What was that? Cassius, who was usually stern and cold, treating me like this? I didn't know whether to feel relieved or worried. One thing was for sure, Duke Valtier was becoming harder to understand. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. I sat in the small room, dimly lit by the light filtering through the window, tidying up some clothes on the table. For the past few days, my mind had been preoccupied with Duke Valtier's unpredictable behavior. Like the wind, sometimes gentle, sometimes harsh, with no clear explanation. But overall, he had been treating me better. He showed a level of concern I never expected, but just when I started to feel more comfortable, his demeanor would turn sharp and cold again. Cassius wasn't someone easy to understand, especially with his high status and the power he held. Meanwhile, I was just a servant, nothing more. But even so, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, something that made me both curious and anxious. Suddenly, one of the servants approached and handed me a letter with a familiar seal. I frowned at the writing on the envelope, a letter from my younger brother, Asdalan. Quickly, I opened the seal and read the contents with growing anxiety. Lana. Father has fallen ill. He collapsed in the fields this morning, and we're all very worried. The doctor has examined him, but they said he needs further care. We don't know what to do. I'm feeling lost, and Mother is also very worried. Please, come home as soon as you can. We need you here. I was silent. The letter felt like a blow that made my heart stop for a moment. Father is sick. I felt my whole body go weak, and the air around me seemed to grow heavy. I tried to calm myself, but the overwhelming worry in my chest was too much to ignore. Without thinking, I left my work behind and ran to the servant's room where I kept my wool jacket. I grabbed the jacket I usually wore for traveling. My body moved automatically, no time for hesitation or waiting. Father needed me, and I had to go home right away. I looked around, searching for Madame Veronica, the head servant who usually watched over me. But she wasn't here. I searched through a few rooms, but she was nowhere to be found. There was no time left. I had to go now. Without anyone stopping me, I quickly walked toward the mansion's front door. There was no time for farewells or asking for permission. All that occupied my mind was one goal: home. I had to go home, for Father. I had to leave now. I ran across the mansion's yard, not looking back. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Chapter 11. The journey home felt longer than usual. Every kilometer I traveled felt like a breath held in my chest. Anxiety echoed in my heart. Upon arriving home, the atmosphere that should have been warm felt so foreign. The house that was once filled with laughter now seemed silent, as if it held untold sadness in its quiet. My steps were heavy as I made my way to Father's room. When I opened the door, I saw him lying weakly in bed. His body looked thinner and frailer than I had ever seen, the lines of exhaustion on his pale face deepening. His lips were dry, as if he could no longer speak. Beside him, my siblings, Asdalan and Lila, sat with anxious faces.
Father.
I whispered, though I knew he wouldn't hear me. I reached out and held his limp hand. My heart ached at the sight of him, usually so strong and healthy, now in such a state. Asdalan looked at me with a sad gaze.
Father's condition hasn't improved,
he said softly, trying to hold back the restlessness evident on his face. Lila, sitting on the other side of Father, glanced at me with the same look.
The doctor said Father needs a lot of rest, sis.
She said, her voice trembling.
His condition has worsened since you left. His health has been deteriorating.
Asdalan continued in a hoarse voice.
Father also has a lot of debt. Aunt Nassia, who used to send money, is struggling herself. Our farm isn't producing like it used to.
I nodded slowly, trying to absorb it all. It felt like losing my grip on everything, not knowing what to do. The father I once knew, full of life and energy, was now mired in difficulty.
Father needs to know I'm here.
I murmured softly, looking at his troubled face as he slept. I tightened my grip on his frail, thin hand.
I'm your eldest child, Father. I will always be here for you.
Lila and Asdalan exchanged glances. They both nodded but said nothing. They, too, were feeling the weight of the situation, hoping I could find a way out.
Don't worry, Father.
I whispered once more, my voice full of sorrow.
I'll do my best to help our family.
I squeezed his hand gently, then remembered my work.
I'll take a few days off to take care of Father.
I thought. I decided to write a letter to Madame Veronica, hoping she would understand the situation. The letter was short, explaining that my father was seriously ill and asking for permission to take a temporary leave to care for him. After sending the letter, I waited with anxious anticipation. But the response from Veronica was far from what I had hoped.
Lana, you can't just leave here and ask for time off like that. You haven't even worked here long enough to earn that right. Your duties here are being neglected and affecting the other servants. Return immediately.
The letter read, cold and unyielding. My eyes stung as I read her words. I felt betrayed, as if my reason for taking leave wasn't enough to matter. I was just a servant, nothing more, I knew that. But in a time like this, I had hoped for some understanding. Unfortunately, reality was not on my side. A short while later, I wrote a reply. This time, I explained more about my father's condition, trying to appeal for some sympathy.
Madam Veronica, my father is critically ill. Please allow me some leniency. This is not something I can ignore.
I wrote, my heart uneasy. However, the reply I received was colder than before.
You're making excuses, Lana. You were hired here with a good salary. If you feel you can't continue, maybe it's time we end our working relationship. There's no need for you to return.
The words felt like a sharp needle piercing my heart. I froze. Everything seemed pointless. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Cassius POV. In the study filled with maps, documents, and strategic plans, Cassius stood at the long table, his finger pointing to a spot on the map. Rael sat across, listening intently to Cassius' explanation, though his eyes occasionally flickered toward the window. The sky had grown overcast, adding a heavy mood to the room.
This is the final step,
Cassius said, his voice firm yet controlled.
Make sure our people understand their roles. If anyone strays, it will all fall apart.
Rael nodded, but before he could respond, there was a knock at the door that interrupted their conversation. A guard entered, holding a message in his hand.
Lord Rael, this is from home.
Rael furrowed his brow. He took the letter and read it quickly. As soon as his eyes finished scanning, his expression shifted dramatically, half shock, half frustration.
Something wrong?
Cassius asked, not taking his eyes off the map. Rael placed the letter on the table.
Lana, the maid who replaced Rosa to take care of your needs, has resigned suddenly. Veronica has suggested a few names to take her place.
Cassius finally lifted his gaze, his eyebrows raising slightly.
Resigned? Why? Since when? Just now.
Rael replied, his tone sharper than he intended.
She sent a letter saying she had to return home due to family reasons.
Cassius stared at Rael, his eyes narrowing slightly.
And you believe that?
Rael sighed, suppressing his frustration with considerable effort.
Of course not. Lana has only worked here a few weeks. She's a diligent worker, though a bit careless. She's barely caused any trouble. But why is she suddenly leaving without speaking to anyone directly? I heard she really needed this job. It just doesn't add up.
Cassius, who had previously seemed absorbed in the map and documents, now fell silent. His eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening.
Needed this job, you say? Then why did she leave?
Rael hesitated for a moment, then shook his head.
I've heard some rumors from the other servants. Her father is critically ill and her family is in financial trouble. Meanwhile, the maids here at Manor Valtier earn quite a good wage. Her position is highly coveted.
Cassius slowly turned his body, his eyes filled with something hard to read: anger, concern, or maybe both.
Could she have been forced out?
His voice was low, almost a whisper, but there was a coldness to it. Rael shrugged, trying to remain calm despite the shift in the room's atmosphere.
I don't know. I still need to speak with the head servant. This decision was too sudden, and I think...
Before Rael could finish his sentence, Cassius suddenly stood up straight, his expression dark.
Prepare the driver.
He ordered, cutting Rael off. Rael stared at Cassius, his eyes wide.
Duke Valtier, what are you doing? We're in the middle of an important mission.
Cassius ignored Rael completely, swiftly grabbing his long coat.
We're going back home. Now.
Rael raised his hand, trying to calm the situation as a friend.
Cass, think this through. This isn't the right time. You can't just abandon this mission.
But Cassius was already heading for the door, his expression unwavering.
I don't care.
He said firmly, not turning back.
Lana isn't just leaving. If something's causing her to leave my house, I will know the real reason.
Rael could only sigh deeply. He didn't say anything, but in his heart, he sensed something strange. Why did Lana have such a strong influence on Cassius? What was the connection between them? For now, though, Rael chose silence, allowing Cassius to walk with a determination that couldn't be stopped. Chapter 12. Cassius POV. Upon arriving home, Cassius stepped out of the car with long, decisive strides, his face stormy and threatening. The servants at the manor quickly bowed in respect, but Cassius ignored them completely, walking briskly toward Lana's room. Without knocking, he slammed the door open, his eyes sweeping across the room. It was empty. Only remnants of Lana's presence remained, some small items she hadn't taken, and the bed, neatly made. Cassius stood in the doorway, his jaw clenched. He stepped inside, opening the wardrobe and drawers just to be sure. But everything confirmed what he had already suspected: Lana was truly gone. He clenched his fist, his fingers trembling with suppressed anger.
She didn't even speak to me directly.
He muttered, his low voice dangerous. Without wasting any more time, he turned and strode out, his footsteps echoing down the corridor.
Call Veronica. Now.
Madame Veronica arrived at Cassius' office with a worried look. She had already heard from the servants about the Duke's tense search. When she opened the door and saw him standing by the window, his silhouette dark and heavy, she felt a chill.
Duke Valtier.
Veronica greeted, her voice slightly shaky. Cassius didn't immediately respond. He slowly turned his body, his gaze sharp as it met Veronica's, causing her to swallow nervously.
Lana is gone. Without a word to me.
He said, his voice like ice.
And you're the head servant. Do you mean to tell me you know nothing about this?
Veronica stumbled, her knees nearly buckling.
I apologize, Your Grace. Lana did leave the manor without informing anyone. I didn't expect. But she sent a letter explaining why, didn't she?
Cassius cut her off, his tone dropping even lower, the pressure making Veronica even more uneasy.
Yes, Your Grace.
Veronica answered quickly, her head lowered.
She said her father was gravely ill, and her family needed her to care for him.
Cassius narrowed his eyes, his stare so piercing that Veronica felt like she was on trial.
And you let her leave her duties without my permission?
He asked coldly, each word striking like a sword.
Her tasks here were falling behind, and a replacement was necessary. It was impossible to wait for her return. So,
Madame Veronica shrugged.
I thought it best that she leave her position.
She tried to control her nerves.
I assumed you wouldn't want to be bothered with such matters, Your Grace. That's why I didn't inform you. Besides, Lana broke the manor's rules. She left without proper leave, and dared to request time off she wasn't entitled to as a new servant.
Cassius stepped forward, his pace slow but full of pressure, until only a few steps remained between them.
So, you rejected her request and let her leave without a word. I was simply following the rules, Your Grace.
Veronica replied, her voice pleading, though it was trembling. Cassius snorted cynically.
Following the rules.
He turned his body slightly, as though unwilling to look at Veronica too long.
Your job is to ensure my operations run smoothly, including listening to the people in this house, especially those who are important to me.
Veronica was taken aback by his tone, but didn't dare lift her gaze.
I apologize, Your Grace. I didn't mean.
Cassius looked at her again, his face expressionless, but his voice shook her.
Lana left because you neglected your duty as an overseer. And now you've fired her. You failed in your responsibility, Veronica. I'm sorry, Your Grace. Enough.
Cassius shouted, making Veronica freeze in place. Veronica fell to her knees, hands clasped together in a pleading position.
Please, Your Grace. Give me a second chance. I swear I won't repeat this mistake.
Cassius stared at her with no emotion, then spoke coldly.
You dare ask for a second chance?
Veronica lifted her face, hope in her eyes.
Anything, Your Grace. I'll do anything.
Cassius leaned closer, lowering his face until it was level with hers.
You will find Lana and bring her back to this house. How you do it, I don't care. That's your responsibility now. If you fail, there will be no place for you in this house. Or maybe even in this world.
Veronica swallowed hard and nodded quickly.
I understand, Your Grace. I'll find her right away. Good.
Cassius stood up straight, his voice dropping lower, almost a threat.
I do not accept failure, Veronica.
Veronica hurriedly left the room, her face pale, while Cassius stood there, staring out the window with an empty gaze. His mind was filled with worry, hidden behind his cold facade.
Cassius POV.
3 days had passed since Lana's departure, and Veronica still hadn't found any significant clues. Today, she stood in front of the old house where Rosa, Lana's aunt, had once lived. The house was empty, the windows sealed shut, and the paint on the walls peeling. Even the front yard, once neat, was now overrun with wild weeds. Veronica knocked on the door several times, hoping someone might give her a lead. But there was no answer. She circled the house, hoping to find any signs of life, but it was all in vain.
This house has been empty for a long time.
She muttered, trying to hold back her frustration.
Where did they go?
Veronica returned to the manor empty-handed. As soon as she arrived, she went straight to Cassius' office. Rael was already there, standing with a serious expression. They gave their latest report to the Duke, but the news was clearly unsatisfactory.
Aunt Rosa's house is empty, Your Grace.
Veronica said cautiously.
It seems they moved without leaving any information. I'll keep searching for clues.
Cassius sat in his chair with a cold expression, but his eyes darkened, betraying the storm brewing beneath.
3 days, Veronica.
He said in a low voice, making the room feel even colder.
And you still haven't found anything?
Veronica lowered her head, her voice full of regret.
I apologize, Your Grace. I'll try searching elsewhere. Try?
Cassius scoffed, then fixed Veronica and Rael with a sharp look.
I'm not paying you to try. I'm paying you to get results.
Rael, usually calm, responded defensively.
We've done our best, Your Grace. But Lana hasn't left any easy traces to follow.
Cassius didn't respond immediately. After what felt like an eternity, he gave a small nod.
Leave.
He ordered, his voice clipped. Veronica and Rael exchanged a glance before bowing and leaving the room. As soon as the door closed, a loud crash echoed from within.
Lana.
Cassius screamed, slamming his fist onto his desk, sending papers and pens flying. The frustration he had suppressed over the past few days finally erupted. He stood with ragged breaths, his hands clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white.
She's mine. That foolish girl dared to leave me.
His voice was a hiss, full of rage and loss that he wasn't willing to acknowledge. Cassius walked toward the large window in his office, staring out with an empty gaze. The light drizzle outside mirrored the emptiness he felt inside. He had always been in control of his life, of everyone around him. But now, the presence of a girl he had once dismissed had shattered that balance. Lana. Her name echoed in his mind. She came uninvited, bound him without his realizing it, and then left, leaving behind a void that now gnawed at his heart. Cassius clenched his fist again, trying to calm himself, but it was in vain. For the first time in his life, he felt out of control, and that made him both angry and afraid. Asterisk asterisk asterisk.
Congratulations. You have finished listening to the current content.